Hello, guys, and welcome back once again to my English listening exercises. This lesson is going to be about one of our great presidents in the United States. His name was John Fitzgerald Kennedy, John F. Kennedy. I'm going to be reading an excerpt on him, a little bit of history on John F. Kennedy. But before we get started, guys, please like my page and also hit that subscribe button down there if you have not already done so. And as always, it would be greatly appreciated. So, listen to my pronunciations on this history on one of America's greatest president, John F. Kennedy. Are you ready? Let's go. John F. Kennedy was elected in 1960 as the 35th President of the United States. 43-year-old John F. Kennedy became one of the youngest U.S. presidents, as well as the first Roman Catholic. He was born into one of America's wealthiest families and parlayed an elite education and a reputation as a military hero into a successful run for Congress in 1946 and for the U.S. Senate in 1952. As president, Kennedy confronted mounting Cold War tensions in Cuba, Vietnam, and other places around the world. He also led a renewed drive for public service and eventually provided federal support for the growing civil rights movement. His assassination on November 22, 1963 in Dallas, Texas, sent shockwaves around the world and turned the all-too-human Kennedy into a larger-than-life heroic figure. To this day, historians continue to rank John F. Kennedy among the best-loved presidents in American history. He was born on May 29th, 1917, in Brookline, Massachusetts. John F. Kennedy, known as Jack, was the second of 9 children. His parents, Joseph and Rose Kennedy, were members of 2 Boston's most prominent Irish Catholic political families. Despite persistent health problems throughout his childhood and teenage years, he would later be diagnosed with a rare endocrine disorder called Addison's disease. Jack led a privileged youth, attending private schools and spending summers at Hyannis Port on Cape Cod. Joe Kennedy, a hugely successful businessman and an early supporter of Franklin D. Roosevelt, was appointed chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission in 1934, and in 1937 was named U.S. ambassador to Great Britain. This was John F. Kennedy's father. As a student at Harvard, Jack traveled in Europe as his father's secretary. His senior thesis about British unpreparedness for war was later published as an acclaimed book called Why England Slept, 1940. Did you know John F. Kennedy's Senate career got off to a rocky start when he refused to condemn Senator Joseph McCarthy, a personal friend of the Kennedy family whom the Senate voted to censor in 1954 for his relentless pursuit of suspected communists. In the end, though, he planned to vote against McCarthy Kennedy missed the vote when he was hospitalized after a back surgery. John F. Kennedy joined the U.S. Navy in 1941 and 2 years later was sent to the South Pacific, where he was given command of a patrol torpedo boat, a PT boat as they call it. In August 1943, a Japanese destroyer struck the craft, the PT-109, in the Solomon Islands. Kennedy helped some of his marooned crew back to safety and was awarded the Navy Cross and Marine Corps Medal for Heroism. His older brother, Joe Jr., was not so fortunate. He was killed in August of 1944 when his Navy airplane exploded on a secret mission against a German rocket launching site. A grieving Joe Sr. told John Kennedy, it was his duty to fulfill the destiny once intended for Joe Jr., his older brother, to become the first Catholic president of the United States. Abandoning plans to be a journalist, John Kennedy, left the Navy by the end of 1944. Less than a year later, he was back in Boston preparing for a run for Congress in 1946. As a moderately conservative Democrat and backed by his father's fortune, Jack won his party's nomination handedly and carried the mostly working class 11th district by nearly 3-1 over his Republican opponent in the general election. He entered the 80th Congress in 1947 at the age of only 29 years old and immediately attracted attention as well as some criticisms from older members of the Washington establishment for his youthful appearance and relaxed, informal style. Kennedy won re-election to the House of Representatives in 1948 and in 1950. And in 1952 ran successfully for the Senate, defending the popular Republican incumbent Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. On September 12, 1953, Kennedy married the beautiful socialite and journalist Jackie Lee Bouvier. 2 years later, he was forced to undergo a painful operation on his back again. While recovering from the surgery, Jack wrote a best-selling book called Profiles in Courage, which won the Pulitzer Prize for Biography in 1957. The book was later received to be mostly the work of Kennedy's longtime aide, Theodore Sorensen. On his road to presidency, after nearly earning his party's nomination for vice president under Adlai Stevenson in 1956, Kennedy announced his candidacy for president on January 2, 1960. He defeated a primary challenge from the more liberal Herbert Humphrey and chose the Senate Majority Leader, Lyndon Johnson of Texas, as his running mate. In the general election, Kennedy faced a difficult battle against the Republican opponent, Richard Nixon, who was a two-term vice president. I didn't know that. He was very popular under the Dwight D. Eisenhower. Nixon was. I did not know he was a two-term vice president. Offering a young, energetic alternative to Nixon and the status quo, Kennedy benefited from his performance and telegenic appearance. He was a handsome man in the first ever televised debates, watched by millions of viewers. In the November's election, Kennedy won by a narrow margin by less than 120,000 out of some 70 million votes. cast, becoming the youngest man and the first Roman Catholic to be elected president of the United States. With his beautiful young wife and their two small children, Caroline, born in 1957, and John Jr., born just weeks after the election, Kennedy lent an unmistakably aura of youth and glamour to the White House. In his inauguration address, given on January 20th, 1961, the new president called his fellow Americans to work together in pursuit of progress and the elimination of poverty, but also in the battle to win the ongoing Cold War against communism in the world at that time. Kennedy's famous closing words expressed the need for cooperation and sacrifice on the part of the American people. He said, end quote, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." An early crisis in the foreign affairs area occurred in April 1961 when Kennedy approved the plan to send 1,400 CIA-trained Cuban exiles in an amphibious landing at the Bay of Pigs in Cuba. Intended to spur a rebellion that would overthrow the communist leader Fidel Castro at that time, the mission ended in failure, with nearly all of the exiles captured or killed. That June, Kennedy met with Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev in Vienna to discuss the city of Berlin, which had been divided after World War II between Allied and Soviet control. 2 months later, East German troops began building a wall to divide the city. Kennedy sent an army convoy to reassure the West Berliners of U.S. support and would deliver one of the most famous speeches in West Berlin in June of 1963. Kennedy clashed again with Khrushchev in October 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. After learning that the Soviet Union was constructing a number of nuclear and long-range missile sites in Cuba that could pose a threat to the continental United States, Kennedy announced a naval blockade of Cuba. The tense standoff lasted nearly 2 weeks before Khrushchev agreed to dismantle Soviet missile sites in Cuba in return for America's promise not to invade the island and the removal of U.S. missiles from Turkey and other sites close to the Soviet borders. In July 1963, Kennedy won his greatest foreign affairs victory when Khrushchev agreed to join him and Britain's Prime Minister Harold Macmillan in signing a nuclear test ban treaty. In Southeast Asia, however, Kennedy desire to curb the spread of communism led him to escalate U.S. involvement in the conflict in Vietnam, even as privately he expressed his dismay over that situation. During his first year in office, Kennedy oversaw the launch of the Peace Corps, which is used all over the world today, which would send young volunteers in undeveloped countries all over the world. Otherwise, he was unable to achieve much of his proposed legislation during his lifetime, including two of his biggest priorities, income tax cuts and the Civil Rights Bill. Kennedy was slow to commit himself to the civil rights cause, but was eventually forced into action, sending federal troops to support the desegregation of the University of Mississippi after riots there left 2 dead and many others injured. The following summer, Kennedy announced his intentions to propose a comprehensive civil rights bill and endorsed the massive March on Washington that took place in August of that year. Kennedy was an enormously popular president, both at home and abroad, overseas. And his family drew famous comparisons to King Arthur's court at Camelot. His brother Bobby served as his attorney general, while the youngest Kennedy's son, Edward, or Ted as he's known, was elected to Jack's former Senate seat in 1962. Jackie Kennedy became an international icon of style, beauty, and sophistication. Though stories of her husband's numerous marital infidelities and his personal association with members of organized crime would later emerge to complicate the Kennedys' image. On November 22, 1963, the president and his wife landed in Dallas, Texas. He had spoken in San Antonio, Austin, and Fort Worth, Texas the day before. From the airfield, the party then traveled in a motorcade to the Dallas Trade Mart, the site of Jack's next speaking engagement. Shortly after 12:30 p.m., as the motorcade was passing through the downtown Dallas, gunshots rang out. Kennedy was struck twice, once in the neck and once in the head. He was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at a nearby hospital. 24-year-old Lee Harvey Oswald, known to have communist sympathies, was arrested for killing but was shot and fatally wounded 2 days later by a local nightclub owner named Jack Ruby while being led to jail. Almost immediately, alternative theories of Kennedy's assassination emerged, including conspiracies run by the KGB and the Mafia and the U.S. military-industrial complex, among others. A presidential commission led by Chief Justice Earl Warren concluded that Oswald had acted alone, but speculated and debate over the assassination have persisted to this day. Well, that was the English history reading exercise today about one of America's greatest president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, or John F. Kennedy as he was known. If you like this listening exercise, please like the page, listen to the pronunciations, study the pronunciations, and also hit that subscribe button if you have not already done so. And again, as always, it would be greatly appreciated. Until next time, guys, have a great day, okay? Bye.